In my last video, I talked about The Last of Us and the potential for a trilogy. And one of the things that I wanted to focus on was what Neil said a few years back before Last of Us 2 even released. And he talked about how he can't see The Last of Us without Joel and Ellie. And naturally, people might assume that now that, spoiler alert, my boy's not here, Joel's gone, there's no season 3, there's no game 3, there's essentially no trilogy of The Last of Us. And I think that on the surface level we might think that, but there actually is. And that's because Joel physically is not here, but spiritually, in Ellie's heart, the influence that he left upon her, he actually is. And that's a very true to life reality. And with Last of Us going for realism, it's natural that we will see essentially Joel living in Ellie's heart as she continues on in her story. And essentially what I think we're seeing within this trilogy is also revealed with Neil in this conference that he had before Last of Us 2. And he talked about Last of Us being this cycle of violence. And I think overall this trilogy, he kind of revealed his hand here. And I believe that this trilogy is about the cycle of life, where Ellie starts out normal, a naive kid in the first game. The second game, she goes through a tragedy. And the third game is Ellie refinding her humanity and herself again. Normal, she lost herself. She's refinding herself and continuing on with life. And I think that is a very honest story. It's a very real story that we experience in outside of video games in real life. And I think that with Last of Us going for realism, it makes sense that Ellie will have to learn how to continue on with Joel. And again, physically he's not here, but spiritually he still is influencing Ellie because she will be following in his footsteps. And she will probably help someone that was lost like her or naive like her in the first game find her footing. And so I think that the Last of Us 3 essentially is still a Joel and Ellie game. And with going back to the conference where Neil stated that he can't see The Last of Us without Joel and Ellie, I think that this still then holds true, and therefore we'll see this third game. I think that it's the only thing that can really happen now. I don't see how things can get any worse for Ellie, or for any of these characters. Things have to somehow wrap up essentially and come to an actual close. And I think that's ultimately why The Last of Us 2 was so controversial, is because it didn't feel like an actual ending to a story like The Last of Us did, the first one. And that's because it could have just stayed one game. But reality isn't just one game. And if they're trying to go for realism and tell an honest, real story, the second game has to happen actually. Even if it hurts. That's also our lives. And so the third game also happens, I believe. And I think it makes sense for it to happen. I think that's why it left a bad taste in people's mouths. And ultimately, I think that's what we're going to see. And, there are some, political beliefs inserted into the second game. And I know a lot of people didn't like that. But again, I think it just tells an honest story. I think that Neil is just speaking from his heart of from his worldview and what he believes, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Um, Otherwise, every game would just be the same and things would just be bland. It's interesting to see people take a risk. It took a lot of skill from Naughty Dog, and I think we have to acknowledge this to be able to have us see another person's perspective and almost empathize with Abby towards the end. I think that takes a lot of grit, and it really took a huge risk in, it may not pay off that we like Abby, and or at least like understand her, and I think that that's what's so cool about this medium that is video games, where we can even begin to entertain these kind of character flips and actually understand the other side. And so when we're addressing the topic of the cycle of violence in the second game, I think they did a fantastic job, even though obviously I don't want to play Abby, I want to play Ellie. I can respect what they did. And so I think in the third game, I think it's going to be a lot better of a game in terms of really wrapping up this trilogy and really solidifying a whole story and not just leaving it on this second one. And there are some rumors that Naughty Dog is working on a completely separate game. Maybe they are taking a break from The Last of Us, I'm not sure, but I do believe that we are getting a third game. And in a previous video, I talked about, of course, is season 3 coming or is game 3 coming, so make sure to check that out. But let me know what you think in the comments. What do you think about game 3? How do you think the series is going to end? Will we get a third game at all? Did they just quit on Last of Us? Let me know. Thanks for watching.